Hey guys, so I heard a rumor that people don't like these wobbly videos, and I completely understand, but for something where you're trying to get close-ups, I really don't know a better way to do it than this. So I took a look at a sine wave inverter from a very suspect source a couple weeks ago, and it actually was performing just fine. 600 watts, and it had a surge or momentary of 1200, but that was not enough to run the AC motor that I was trying to run, which is on an air compressor. And really, saying a motor, a compressor really isn't the same as a motor, so that's probably not a fair expectation to get 600 watts to be able to get 3 times that. And really what that comes down to is the power factor. And as a little side note, I managed to blow the kilowatt easy power meter in the process of that. So I've only had this sucker for a couple months. So I bought in 2020. But this P4460, the reviews are horrible on it, and it appears to be because if you have any sort of a brownout, it's got a 15 amp fuse on it, and as soon as you have a brownout, then you're going to have high current, and something like an off-grid system, you're probably going to see brownouts if you ever stall a motor or anything. So yeah, I managed to brick that. What I've gone ahead and initiated in support. I'm 2 weeks in and still haven't gotten a replacement for that. But anyways, the point of the video is this inverter. So this is a lot beefier. Instead of 600, this is 2,000 watts, 4,000 watts. I suspect I need around 1,000. But for the price point, at least what you could get open box on Amazon, this sucker came in around 200 bucks. And that seemed to be about the best value out there. I could definitely get away with something like a 1,200 watt, but I really just didn't see anything that looked to be at least as good of quality as that other one I looked at, if not better. A couple things to note right off the bat is we do have an aluminum housing on the entire thing, and a good indicator that we're actually going to get some good heat dissipation is you can see the screws going right into the outer casing on here. The other thing is we actually do have some sort of a regulation body on this. Confirms to UL standards. It is the Intertech listed, so definitely feel a little bit better there. And then they give you a couple of ratings. I think the big one here is 17 amps. Which is what I really care about. Well, looking at the sides real quick, we got 2 fans instead of 1. Lugs are much bigger. One thing I like is that they put these on opposite sides. And this one actually did bother to include a pretty decent set of cables. One thing that's kind of funny is they've ganged up 2 wires, and if you know anything about electricity, that really isn't sufficient. However, it's typically good enough. But yeah, they did include both wires ganged up there with pretty nice gauge. Let's see what they got on these wires. No labeling whatsoever, so yeah, it could be aluminum. It does feel pretty soft, so maybe that is actual copper. And looking at the other side, we have something that's pretty similar, but we do get an actual ground lug on this one, where the other one I think you're just supposed to attach it to the chassis ground or the case ground. Some sort of a USB port for 5-volt output. A remote, which is just on an RJ11 connection, to be able to remotely power it, and it might actually give the LED status out as well. And then instead of a throwing switch, we now have a push button switch. And that is truly a soft push button switch, that there is no mechanical disconnect on that. And again, a couple 15 amp plugs. It would be nice to have actual lugs to hook up into some sort of, at 2,000 watts, this is kind of getting to the point where people are going to be running sheds and whatnot off of it, so it would be nice to see that be lugs so you could hook it back into some sort of a standard electrical wiring. First impressions inside here, much better PCB board. Again, the other one was adequate, but this is definitely going to be a step up in quality. Not just because it's a green PCB board, but you can see that the components are a lot better spaced out. Again, we have pretty good voltage ratings on all the capacitors. Daughter boards look to be in much better shape. I'm not going to do a long video like the other one. You can see that there are a couple components on here, such as this one, that aren't actually stuck on anything. However, I don't know if that really is going to dissipate a lot of heat, but that was the only possible IGBT or MOSFET or anything like that voltage regulator that did not have an attachment to a heatsink. And then you can get the serial number off that too. And it is nice to see that it is in fact a 2000 watt. One thing I liked about that other one is it did appear to be a little bit overrated, especially looking at some of the higher end ones in that series. They had put a decent safety factor on that. Granted, I'm sure this has a safety factor as well, but that was pretty nice to see. So you can see a couple things that aren't the most enduring, but should be fine, you know. One of these is a little bit loose mechanically. It's fine. We have more automotive fuses in here. Looks like they're all 30 amps and 4 sets of those. PS500, I'm assuming that's gonna relate to 500 watts somehow. And one other thing that I noticed was that these big capacitors are actually rated to 250 volts. Again, I'm not sure if it's just simply switching something on here and you can get the 240 volt output instead of 120, but that is kind of interesting to see. And the other thing that I thought I'd point out is we have all these diodes in here. And instead of being some sort of a built-in module, they actually have air-cooled diodes raised off the surface of the PCB. Looking at the daughter boards, it's pretty comparable to what we saw in the other one. However, I don't see any obvious solder mask issues. I do see a little bit nicer oscillators on it, and I do see trim pots, so that's always a good sign. Another thing that's always kind of nice to look at is if they do put the rating on the wires, just making sure that makes sense. So this is a 10 gauge on this black wire, so there's 2 of those. So one going to each. Notice that they are different lengths. That should be fine, but you know, people start getting really weird about wanting to make sure that they have equal resistance across all their lines. Well, as soon as you get inside of this, they're different lengths. But so 10 gauge on there. I think people normally say 10 gauge is good for what, 40 amps, I think. And really not a whole lot of concern. I don't think I'm going to bother to look at the underside of this. But again, looking, we have most of our components are, they have some sort of elastic or snot on them to keep them from vibrating. Definitely a step up. We have a lot of labeled components on it. And I think overall this is going to speak to the higher tier products. I wouldn't be surprised to see this rebranded under more of a name brand. But this seems to be kind of the minimal recommended option for people who are going to do a off-grid solar setup long term. And really for me, it was just kind of, this was the least expensive option that had a high enough wattage. So I'll go ahead and cut here, and I'll do a little electrical section as well and probably update on that, assuming that it passes. But at 2000 watts it better be able to handle a small 13 amp air conditioner just fine. And again, that thing's only drawing 500 watts, so you know, even a fudge factor of 4, having 2000 watts for an instantaneous kick on shouldn't be a problem. And if for some reason it is, I think I'll take a clamp meter to that and we can take a look at what's really going on there. If it is something inverter side, or maybe it's like my battery itself, or the wiring going from one to the other. We'll try and figure out what's going on there. Otherwise, feel free to comment on any suggested tools that are coming in. I don't really want to be purchasing much outside of necessities in the solar project right now, just because of the economy. But as always, thanks for watching, and feel free to check out some others in the playlist below. Have a good night.